Good morning, everybody. Here we are on this look outside our windows. This beautiful Good Friday. Uh, Good Friday is not always synonymous with that, but it is nice to see it outside our own windows. Uh, Good Friday, traditionally known, obviously in the states, but it's known as different things throughout the world. I know in Denmark it's called Long Friday. In Germany it's called Sorrowful Friday. Uh, there's all kinds of different options, but for the most part, it all gathers around the Good Friday part. Um, Mentioned last week or the week before, I know it's kind of how strange doing these have been when your intent is one thing and God changes your mind and you go a different direction. I mean, the intention today was we were just going to introduce a video and play it and let that do the talking. But as I went through yesterday, God had a different plan. Um, we're all familiar with the story of the crucifixion and the suffering that Christ did for us. And the basics of it, but you'll also notice that the Gospels really don't go into details about the crucifixion. Uh, a lot of that has to do with at the time, um, most people knew what crucifixion was. Uh, I mean, we're familiar with it just from the history books. Good morning, Shelley. Uh, but do we really understand what transpired that day? Uh, I know there's a lot of stories and about going on around the crucifixion. Crucifixion itself was something that was actually, from what we can tell, came around probably around the Assyrians or the Babylonians' time, but really we don't have record of it until the Persians in about the fourth century or the sixth century. I'm sorry. Good morning, Nancy. That's when we start seeing the creation of more prominent of the crucifixions, but it was still something that was still upcoming. They were still trying to figure it out. Uh, for lack of a better term, it really wasn't perfected, and I use that term loosely, until the Romans about the third century. This was all BC. So by the time it came around to Jesus' time, the crucifixion was something that was very widely known, and how intense it could actually be. To give you a basis of an idea, something that I had figured out or something that I had learned, never did I realize the pain and the suffering from crucifixion was so great that during that time they actually didn't have a word for it. It was beyond any word or explanation of a word of what they had. They actually had to create a word for the pain and the suffering that was created from the cross. The word excruciating literally means, at its root basis, from the cross. It was so far beyond anything that anybody knew, they had to create a word to tell how agonizing this pain truly was. I mean, we all know the story of the Christ, of the crucifixion with Christ, and how that works, and how this all goes through, and he dies for our suffering, or he dies for our transgressions, or and suffers through all that. But do we really understand? To give you a basis, if we go all the way back to Isaiah 53, it says, "Surely he has been," starting with verse 4, "surely he's been born with our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteem him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, and he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have all turned, every one, to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquities of us all." Talking about God placing all of that on Jesus. I know Pastor Sean talked yesterday about in the garden and the emotion and the feelings that he felt. Um, and that's actually where we start seeing some of the stuff that you really don't comprehend. It talks about, and I think he mentioned it yesterday, but it talks about how when he's praying, he's sweating blood. That's actually a medical condition, and I don't remember the terminology for it, but that's an indication of there's so much mental and emotional pressure on him that it's a condition that basically has caused the blood vessels in his head to burst because he is under so much strain that as he's sweating, it's actually dropping out little drops of blood with it. That's how much emotional pressure he is under at that time. And knowing that he has now the weight of the world, literally the weight of all of the sin of the world on his shoulders, and God has placed that there. I know in our study the other night with Francis Chan, we talked about, can you ever imagine having to put that much pressure on your child and willingly let your child go to suffer? And suffering, especially when it comes to the crucifixion and the cross, is something that I never really wrapped myself into. Uh, Never, because the Bible doesn't go into a whole lot of details about it. I mean, we understand that there was suffering, he was under pain. Well, I mean, we all know the story and how it all goes, but do we really comprehend how deep and how much God's love was for us through that? It starts off in John 19, where it says Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. Flogging in the Roman times was basically it was a whip type of device that had multiple leather straps that came off of it. Within those straps was typically woven bits of metal and bone and some beads, stuff like that, stuff that would actually physically cause more damage than just the leather itself. Uh, it wasn't uncommon for when somebody was flogged that it would actually tear so deep into their skin and into their muscle tissue that there's actually records of the spine being exposed. So much blood loss during that. It actually creates, and Sean could probably correct me if I pronounce this wrong, but it can end up causing what's called hypovolemic shock, which is just basically it's a loss of such blood that it causes the heart to race to try to pump blood that isn't there. It causes your blood pressure to drop. It causes the kidneys to stop producing as they should. And it causes the body to become very thirsty as the body craves fluid, trying to replace that blood loss. That's all starting inside of Jerusalem. That's even before they even get to the cross. Uh, it wasn't uncommon for people to die during the flogging. They wouldn't even make it to the crucifixion. But Christ made it through that and then had to carry his own after losing that much blood to the cross, up to Calvary. And that's a whole nother uh, animal in itself. I mean, we know that he was nailed to the cross, which of course is going to hurt and there's suffering and pain. To give you an idea about crucifixion, how deep it went, the crucifixion was a little bit different back then than what you I mean. We're all used to. They hammered the nails in, they all that stuff. But in reality, when they get up there, the crossbeam is laid separately from the cross itself, and he's laid down, and your arms are stretched out and put on there. Now during the writing during that time, uh, the authors didn't really separate the different parts of the hand. You got your hand, your wrist, your arm, and all that stuff. Basically, your hand was connected to your arm, is the way it was considered. So your wrist was part of your hand, and the way this was done, the Romans would take a iron spike that's 7 to 9 inches long, that was all tapered straight in, and basically they would hammer it in between those bones in your wrist at an angle into the back of your hand. That would cause you to cause it to crush a nerve that runs through there that would basically paralyze your hand. And the way, from what I was reading, the way it was explained is we've all bumped our elbows and bumped those funny bones, and of course we know it's not very funny. That's pretty painful. The pain that was subsided from this is basically like taking that same nerve that you bump and taking a pair of pliers and crushing it. It was that painful to have that put through that nerve that it would paralyze your hand. So just the agony of the nail in the hand. Um, it would go on from that point with the crucifixion. They put him on put him on the vertical beam, and of course drop him up. Now, when you put him on the vertical beam, the feet were placed on there, and your legs were basically placed at a 45-degree angle. And the reason for that I'll get to here in just a second. But then again, it was those same nails, those 7 to 9 inch nails, were pounded into your ankles, into your feet. Um, that would basically crush an artery or tear an artery that was running into your feet. So your feet were paralyzed from that point. You couldn't move your feet anymore at that point. Now, once they lifted you up and stuck you in and dropped you into the ground, of course, you got the jarring of the ground when you fall into the ground. Um, when it comes down, when you go through all of that, it's said within the first couple of minutes, basically your shoulders would dislocate. And within a few minutes after that, your wrists would dislocate. And so you're in agony, and you've got this much, you've got the crushed nerve, you've got dislocated joints, you've got nails running through. I mean, keep in mind that God and Jesus did this for us. They willingly and intentionally suffered through this for us to rid ourselves of this of the sin. It was unheard of. I mean, at the time, to be honest with you, sacrifice has been something that had been around for some time. I mean, we all call him the sacrificial lamb. It had been around for some time to atone us of sin, never to actually cleanse us, but just to atone us from sin. Never was a sacrifice like this. I mean, typically you'd kill the animal, and you'd have the burnt offerings or the splatter the blood. Never were they left to suffer, especially not the way that Jesus had to suffer on that cross. Um, Once you're up there and you've got all that going on, the weight of your body is pulling you down. Now, you're actually put it there at that 45-degree angle, because as you're being pressed down, your chest cavity is being crushed. It's making it hard to breathe. Basically, you'd be able to exhale, but you would literally have to push yourself up with your legs to raise yourself up just enough to be able to inhale more air, at which point you'd fall back down because you didn't have the strength to hold yourself up, causing yourself to exhale again. This was a constant effect that you constantly had to go through. I mean, crucifixion, uh, in essence, was just we talk about the blood loss, we talk about all that, but in reality, it was a very slow, painful asphyxiation to try to have to suffer through this. You were basically cutting your breath line off until you couldn't breathe anymore. And and it was so intense. We see in the Bible where Jesus did it all in a day. It wasn't unheard of that guys would hang in crucifixion for up to a week, suffering through that. Obviously, not with all the other stress that Jesus had, um, but it wasn't uncommon. But you also notice, I think it was in Luke, where they talk about breaking the legs of the two thieves that were up there with Christ. Well, that's why they were breaking their legs. Because it was the day before the Passover, they had to get it all done. They had to get up. Breaking those legs would actually prevent them from being able to stand up, so they would actually asphyxiate quicker. And that's where it comes down to. It's just having to go through, looking through all this week, and I mean, like I said to Sean yesterday, being able to dig deeper into this gives me so much more of a deeper understanding. I mean, like I said, we all understand it was suffering, but did we know how much he suffered? And the fact, going back to Isaiah 52, I'm sorry, 53, and verse 10, it was all planned. It was all knew it was going to happen. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him into grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. So God knew that by allowing Jesus to suffer through that all of his offspring, all of his lineage down the line, could be righteous. Now, if that doesn't express love, I don't know what does. If you're willing to sacrifice your child to go through as much agony as what a crucifixion really was, and I encourage you to look into crucifixion. It can get pretty gory, but it gives you a whole new depth of understanding of what Christ went through for us. Not something that he had to do, something that they wanted to do for us, to give us a chance to free ourselves. Right now, the world has changed, and obviously everybody knows that the school's out for the rest of the year. And on a side note, as a recommendation, school's out. Those of you with parents or those of you with kids, now's a great time to put Bible back into the curriculum. But I encourage you, look into a deeper understanding, especially now that you've got a little more open time of the Easter story. Go to Right Now Media, and if you don't have access, please reach out to us because we're more than happy to tell you how you can get it. There's all kinds of good, detailed explanations inside of Right Now Media that actually covers the Easter story and gives you a deeper and more meaningful understanding of what went through. I know the one that I highly recommend is called Behind the Easter Story. It actually, they're on location in Jerusalem. It goes along the Day of Discovery path that Pastor Jeff did a little while back with the 7 churches in Revelation. It's the same series. They're actually in Jerusalem, and they'll actually show you. Apparently, there's a model of what Jerusalem used to look like outside of Jerusalem, and they actually show you the different places, and they'll actually physically take you to the places that they can to cover all of that. But I highly recommend start going through Right Now Media because, especially right now, there ain't nothing on TV during the days anyway. Watch some of these. Help educate your kids if you got them. Let them see some of them. Various things like that. I do want to pray with you real quick because, like I said, the stuff I said today was not what we intended for this morning, but it was definitely something that God said that needed to be said, and to help us all understand the complexity and how punishing this actually was on the Good Friday that he actually went through on that. I hope that it gets into you, let it sink in and get into you and emotionally affect how much that he voluntarily went through for you, for me, for all of us. I'm going to pray real quick, and then we'll kick off with a video here. I saw that Miss Kim actually beat me to it, but we got another one here coming along. So encourage you tonight. We're kicking off tonight with Bow the Knee. Good morning, y'all. Tonight, 6 o'clock. You are not going to miss it. Great performance. We'll kick it off the rest of the weekend. But let's pray real quick. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we're grateful to be able to gather here today on this Good Friday and to have a deeper understanding of the sacrifice that you gave to us to allow us to be able to have that freedom and that release from sin. And to understand the depth and the complexity that it went through more than just the surface value of the Easter story. We are so grateful and so happy that you were willing to go through that for us. We can't praise you enough to ever begin to show how much that means. I pray that each one of us, you reach inside of us today and you let us, you open our hearts to what that did for us, what that did for us, each of us, and reaching out to those outside of us to explain to them what today truly means. Lord, we do pray all this in your name. We're grateful to have another day here together, Lord, and we do pray this. Amen. And kick it off here. Don't forget, tonight, 6 o'clock, Bow the Knee.
It's Friday. Jesus is praying. Peter's asleep. Judas is betraying, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday. Pilate's struggling. The council is conspiring. The crowd is vilifying. They don't even know that Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The disciples are running like sheep without a shepherd. Mary's crying. Peter is denying. But they don't know that Sundays are coming. It's Friday. The Romans beat my Jesus. They robe him in scarlet. They crown him with thorns. But they don't know that Sunday's coming. It's Friday. See Jesus walking to Calvary. His blood dripping. His body stumbling. And his spirit's burdened. But you see, it's only Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The world's winning. People are sinning. And evil's grinning. It's Friday. The soldiers nailed my Savior's hands to the cross. They nailed my Savior's feet to the cross. And then they raised him up next to criminals. It's Friday. But let me tell you something. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The disciples are questioning what has happened to their king. And the Pharisees are celebrating that their scheming has been achieved. But they don't know it's only Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. He's hanging on the cross, feeling forsaken by his Father, left alone and dying. Can nobody save him? Oh, it's Friday, but Sunday's coming. It's Friday. The earth trembles. The sky grows dark. My King yields his spirit. It's Friday. Hope is lost. Death has won. Sin has conquered. And Satan's just a laughing. It's Friday. Jesus is buried. A soldier stands guard, and a rock is rolled into place. But it's Friday. It is only Friday. Sunday is a coming.